Sometimes, the greatest betrayals happen when we least expect it. Ava Hayes knew this well, standing in the cold marble foyer of the courtroom. The glass doors behind her let in the soft, warm glow of the morning sun, but the light seemed so far away from her heart. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day her life, once perfect, would be torn apart before her eyes. The man she had loved, the man she had stood by for years, was now standing with his mistress at his side, his smile as polished as ever. Ethan Hayes, her husband of 7 years, had walked into this courtroom as if nothing had changed. His mistress, Isabel Morgan, stood beside him, beaming with an air of triumph that made Ava's stomach churn. But Ava wasn't going to let this destroy her. She had prepared for this moment, even if she hadn't known when it would come. She had seen the signs, the whispers, the late nights, the coldness in Ethan's eyes as he'd pulled away from her over the last few months. She had known deep down that something was wrong, but the confirmation, the DNA test results that had arrived just the night before, made everything real. It was all going to change now. As Ava adjusted the strap of her simple black dress, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored walls. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same one who had walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, hopeful and naive. This woman was someone else, someone who had been broken and rebuilt. She had learned the hard way that love could be a battlefield, but today, she was going to take control. The judge's gavel echoed in the silence of the room as everyone waited for the proceedings to begin. Ethan, oblivious to the storm brewing in his wife's heart, was still holding Isabel's hand, squeezing it with an ease that spoke of their long-time affair. He was smug, as though the affair and his future with Isabel were already sealed. But Ava knew better. She had been through hell and back, and this courtroom was where she would rise from the ashes of her broken marriage. The truth was, the man she had married no longer existed in the same form. In his place was someone who had sold their vows for a moment of pleasure, a man too blinded by his own desires to see the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin. As the judge called the court to order, Ava felt a deep breath escape her chest. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. This was about standing tall, reclaiming her dignity, and showing Ethan and everyone else that she wasn't the helpless woman they thought she was. This was her time to take back what was rightfully hers. As the DNA results were handed over to the judge, the weight of the moment hit her. She had done everything she could to keep their marriage intact, to protect the man who had once been her world, but now it was clear that her efforts were in vain. The results in the judge's hands would change everything. But Ava wasn't afraid. She was ready to face the truth, ready to let go of the past, and ready to move forward, stronger than ever. The courtroom was quiet, the air heavy with tension as the judge sorted through the paperwork in front of him. Ava stood still, her mind racing, yet her expression remained calm. She had spent the last few months preparing for this moment, not just for the test results, but for everything it symbolized. Ethan, who had once been her partner, her confidant, now stood on the other side of the room, an unfamiliar figure in her life. His hands were intertwined with Isabel's, their fingers barely apart, as if the years of marriage they shared meant nothing. Ava's heart had once swelled with love for him, but today, it beat with something far stronger, determination. As the judge motioned for both parties to approach, the moment felt surreal. Was this really happening? Was this how it all ended? The life they had built, the love they had once promised to each other, reduced to a courtroom drama where betrayal hung in the air like an invisible weight. As they walked up to the front, Ethan's face still wore that smug expression, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Isabel stood beside him, her eyes flickering with anticipation, as if she were confident she had won. But Ava knew the truth that was about to be revealed by something so simple, yet so devastating, a DNA test. The judge cleared his throat, his voice firm as he addressed the room. "I have the results," he said, holding the envelope in his hand. Ava could feel the tension rise in the room, the whispers beginning to bubble around her. But she stood firm, her back straight, her eyes not leaving Ethan's face. He looked at the judge, his smile faltering for just a moment, before he regained his composure. It wasn't the first time Ava had seen that smile. She had seen it countless times during their marriage, when he would reassure her that everything was fine, that they were in this together. But now, It was just a mask, a thin veil over the reality that had been hiding in plain sight. The judge tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the contents. The room was so still that Ava could hear the rustling of the paper, the sound amplifying in her ears. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. This was it, the moment when everything changed. Mr. Hayes, the judge began, his voice steady. The results confirm that the child in question is indeed your biological son. The silence that followed was deafening. Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Ethan's face transform. The smug confidence drained from his features, replaced by a look of shock, then disbelief. Isabel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide as if she had never expected this outcome. Ava stood there, taking it all in. She had known this moment would come. She had suspected it, felt it deep down, but hearing it aloud, hearing the confirmation, was a different kind of pain. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the undeniable truth. Ethan had betrayed her, not just emotionally, but in the most devastating way possible. He had brought another woman into their lives, and now she was carrying his child. Ava felt a sting in her chest, but it wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that the man she had loved, the man she had trusted with everything, had been living a lie. And now, there was no going back. Ethan's eyes darted between Ava and the judge, his mind clearly racing as he tried to make sense of the situation. Isabel remained silent, her expression unreadable. Ava could see the guilt flicker in Ethan's eyes, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. Ava turned her gaze away from Ethan, focusing on the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I want to make one thing clear. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to take back my life. And this is the first step." She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but it didn't matter. She had taken control. She had made the decision to move on, to stand strong in the face of the pain he had caused her. This moment wasn't about Ethan or Isabel. It was about Ava, about reclaiming her power, her dignity, and her future. The judge nodded, acknowledging her words, and with a final glance at the DNA results, he turned to Ethan. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "it seems your past actions have caught up with you." Ethan's face reddened, but he said nothing. Ava didn't need him to. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Ava stood, her posture steady, her heart racing, but her expression a mask of calm. She had done it. She had faced the man who had broken her, and in this moment, she had reclaimed her life. The judge's words still echoed in her mind, the weight of them heavy in the air. Ethan Hayes, her husband, the man she had loved for so many years, had been exposed. The truth was finally out. As she stood there, the sound of the gavel echoed through her thoughts, sealing the moment in time. She had known this day would come, but nothing could have prepared her for how it would feel. Ethan's face, once full of arrogance and control, now showed only guilt and fear. The room, filled with the echoes of his mistakes, felt colder than it had before. Ava turned to leave, her movements measured, her steps purposeful. She felt the eyes of the courtroom follow her, but she did not look back. She was done with that life. She was done with him. Stepping outside into the cool air, Ava paused for a moment, taking in the vastness of the city before her. The sunlight, filtered through the towering buildings, seemed almost foreign to her now. She had once shared this world with Ethan, dreamed of it, built it together, but now it felt like a different lifetime. Her fingers tightened around her purse as she walked toward her car, each step a declaration of her new life. She was no longer the woman who had stood by his side, trusting him with everything. That woman was gone. Ava's thoughts were interrupted as her phone buzzed in her pocket. She took a deep breath before pulling it out, her eyes narrowing at the screen. The message was from her lawyer, confirming the next steps in the divorce. It was official now. She was free. The weight that had settled on her chest for so long seemed to lift, just slightly, but enough for her to feel the difference. She was free to make her own choices. Free to be herself again. Free to rebuild. Ava climbed into the car and stared out the window as the city passed by. It was a strange feeling, being alone after so many years of living in a partnership, of sharing every moment with someone else. But it wasn't a bad feeling. It was empowering. The world was her canvas now, and she could paint it however she pleased. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had spent too many years seeking it from Ethan, from the world around her, but not anymore. She had built herself up once, and now she would do it again. This time, it would be different. She would not let this break her. It would fuel her. The next morning, Ava stood before the mirror, her reflection staring back at her. The woman she saw was different from the one she had seen yesterday. She was stronger, more confident, and ready to take on the world. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life, and now she was ready for the next. As she applied a coat of lipstick, she thought about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but she would build something better than what she had before. This time, it was all about her. Ava was done being the woman who waited in the shadows. She was done being the woman who put her dreams on hold for the man she thought she loved. It was time to live for herself, to create a life that was entirely her own. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and decisions Ava had never imagined she would need to make. As she sat at her desk, the morning sun casting long shadows through the office window, she reflected on the life she was building. It wasn't the life she had planned with Ethan, but it was hers, every part of it. The phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was her lawyer, confirming the finalization of the divorce papers. There was no turning back now. Ava could feel the weight of it all, but it wasn't heavy anymore. She was free. Free from the man who had betrayed her. Free from the life that had been built on lies. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe without feeling suffocated by the past. She stood up, her hand resting on the back of the chair, looking out the window at the city below. It had been her dream to live here, to have this view, and now it was real. She had worked hard for this moment, harder than she ever had before. There was no one else to thank but herself. She had built her career from the ground up, and now she was in control of her destiny. As Ava walked through the city later that afternoon, her steps were light, almost as if she was floating above the ground. She passed familiar streets, places she had walked with Ethan, but now they seemed different. The memories didn't sting as much anymore. She was no longer the woman trapped in a marriage that no longer served her. She was Ava Hayes, a woman on her own, walking toward a future full of possibilities. Ava had never been one to seek revenge. She had never wanted to get even with Ethan. But the truth was, his betrayal had changed her. It had awakened something inside of her, a fire that she hadn't known was there. She wasn't just going to survive this. She was going to thrive. The next few weeks passed in a blur of networking, meetings, and new opportunities. Ava found herself speaking at events, her story inspiring others. She was no longer the woman who had stayed quiet in the background. She was a leader now, someone people looked to for strength and guidance. It was at one of these events that she met David Sinclair, a fellow entrepreneur who had made his name in the tech world. He was kind, intelligent, and successful, everything Ethan had once been in her eyes. But there was something different about David. He didn't see Ava as just a successful woman. He saw her as someone with a future, someone who had the potential to change the world. As their conversations deepened over the following weeks, Ava realized something she hadn't expected. She didn't need to be in a relationship to feel complete. She had spent so many years defining herself through her relationship with Ethan that she had forgotten who she was without him. And now, for the first time, she was learning who Ava Hayes truly was. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where the old pain resurfaced. But with each passing day, she grew stronger. The memories of her marriage faded, replaced by new experiences and new connections. She found herself smiling again, laughing freely, and enjoying life in a way she hadn't in years. Ava's life was no longer defined by betrayal or regret. It was defined by the choices she made each day. She was taking back the power that had once been taken from her, and with each decision, she was building a future that was truly hers. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to Ethan or anyone else. It was about living life on her own terms, about becoming the woman she was always meant to be. Ava stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the city once more. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. She had built this life, piece by piece, and she was proud of it. She had faced the storm, and now she was standing in the light. This was only the beginning. The months that followed were a whirlwind of growth, self-discovery, and transformation. Ava Hayes stood taller than ever before, her confidence radiating with every step she took. The life she had once shared with Ethan felt like a distant memory now, a chapter closed forever. She was no longer the woman who had waited in the shadows, putting her dreams on hold for someone else. Now, her dreams were her own, and she was determined to make them a reality. Every day, Ava woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her business ventures were flourishing, her personal brand gaining recognition, and the women who admired her resilience found strength in her story. She had become more than just a survivor of betrayal. She had become a beacon of hope for others. As she stood in front of a crowd at a conference, sharing her journey of overcoming hardship, Ava felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced. The applause that followed her speech wasn't just for the words she had spoken, it was for the woman she had become. She had built herself up from the ground, not out of bitterness or revenge, but out of the sheer desire to live authentically and unapologetically. And in doing so, she had found a new sense of freedom. One afternoon, as Ava sat at a cafe, sipping her coffee, she received a message that made her pause. It was from Ethan. It had been months since they had spoken, but his message was short and to the point. "I've made a mistake. I'm sorry." Ava stared at the message for a long moment, her mind racing. She had expected this moment to come, but now that it had, she wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to write back, to let him know how much he had hurt her, how much he had taken from her. But another part of her, the stronger part, knew that none of it mattered anymore. He wasn't a part of her life anymore. She had moved on, and that was all that mattered. Ava had learned a valuable lesson during these months of rebuilding. Forgiveness wasn't about letting someone else off the hook. It was about letting go of the pain. But she wasn't ready to let Ethan back into her life. She had forgiven him in her heart, but there was no going back to what they had. She had something better now. She had herself. As the months passed, Ava continued to thrive. Her business expanded, and she became known as a powerful voice in the entrepreneurial world. She was no longer just a businesswoman. She was a symbol of strength, resilience, and the power of self-love. And though she had no interest in returning to her past, there was one thing she had learned. She was never alone in this journey. She had her friends, her family, and most importantly, herself. One evening, as she walked home after a long day of meetings, Ava caught her reflection in a store window. The woman she saw wasn't the same woman who had walked into that courtroom months ago, standing on the precipice of her life, unsure of what to do next. The woman in the reflection was strong, confident, and at peace. She had come so far, and for the first time in a long time, Ava truly felt at home in her own skin. She was finally living for herself. The road had not been easy, and the scars from her past would never fully disappear, but Ava had learned to embrace them. They were a part of her story, but they did not define her. The woman who had once been broken had become someone who could stand tall, unapologetically, and say, "I am enough." As she continued walking down the street, Ava smiled to herself. This was her life now. She had reclaimed her power, and nothing was going to take that away from her. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, opportunities, and new beginnings. Ava Hayes had made a name for herself in ways she had never imagined. Her days were filled with business ventures, networking events, and moments of self-reflection. She had become more than just a survivor of betrayal. She had become a force of nature. Every decision she made, every step she took, was with purpose. It wasn't just about building her career or proving something to anyone. It was about proving to herself that she could do this on her own, without the support of a man who had once claimed to love her. She had come to realize that her worth had never been tied to Ethan or anyone else. It was her own strength that had carried her through, and that strength was growing with every passing day. One evening, as Ava sat in her office reviewing contracts for an upcoming project, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She glanced up, expecting her assistant, but instead, it was someone she hadn't seen in months, David Sinclair. He stood in the doorway, his posture confident, but his eyes softened with a warmth that made Ava pause. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice calm, yet filled with a hint of something unspoken. Ava smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. "Not at all," she replied, gesturing for him to enter. David stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. There was something comforting about him, a steadiness that had been absent in her life for so long. They had kept in touch over the past few months, their conversations growing deeper, more personal, but never crossing the line. Ava had admired his intellect, his drive, and his respect for her independence. But more than anything, she had begun to appreciate the way he made her feel, like she was enough just as she was. "How are you?" David asked, his gaze never leaving her as he took a seat across from her. Ava leaned back in her chair, considering the question. She had asked herself that so many times over the past few months. "I'm good," she said, her voice steady. "Really good, actually." David nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I can see that. You're thriving." Ava shrugged, though there was no denying the pride she felt. "It's been a journey, but I'm proud of where I am now." David's expression softened as he looked at her. "I've been following your progress. I'm impressed by everything you've accomplished. You're truly doing something remarkable." Ava felt her heart skip a beat. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and for a moment, she wondered if she had misread the situation. "Thank you," she said quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk. "That means a lot coming from you." There was a brief silence between them, a moment where the air felt thick with unspoken words. David broke it by leaning forward slightly, his gaze intense yet kind. "Ava, I don't want to make things complicated, but I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I admire your strength, your independence, but I also see something else. Something I don't think you see yourself." Ava's breath caught in her throat. She had known there was something between them, something she hadn't fully acknowledged, but now it felt impossible to ignore. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. David took a deep breath, as if weighing his words carefully. "You're more than just a survivor. You're someone who deserves to be loved, cherished, and cared for. I want to be the one to do that for you, if you'll let me." Ava's mind raced. She had spent so much time focused on herself, on building her life back up, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to let someone in. But David's words touched something deep inside her, a longing she had buried for so long. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've been through so much, and I've worked hard to build myself back up. I'm afraid of losing myself again." David's eyes softened with understanding. "You don't have to lose yourself, Ava. You're strong, and I admire that more than anything. I just want to be there for you, to support you in whatever way you need." Ava looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone in again. "I'm not sure what this is yet," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm willing to find out." David smiled, and for the first time in months, Ava felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future, hope for herself, and hope for a love that didn't define her, but simply added to the life she had built. It wasn't about needing someone else to complete her. It was about allowing herself to share her life with someone who respected her, who saw her for who she truly was. And with that, Ava took another step forward in her journey, not just as a survivor, but as a woman who was ready to embrace the love and happiness she deserved. The weeks following their conversation were filled with a quiet kind of intensity. Ava had never imagined that her life would take such a turn, but now, with David in her life, things felt different in a way she couldn't quite put into words. She had always been strong, always self-sufficient, but there was something comforting about having someone who understood her, who respected her independence, yet still wanted to be a part of her life. Their connection grew slowly, steadily. David was never pushy. He never demanded anything from her. Instead, he let her set the pace. And in that, Ava found something she hadn't realized she needed: space to breathe, time to think, and a partner who was willing to let her come to her own conclusions. It wasn't about being swept off her feet. It was about finding someone who met her where she was, someone who wasn't trying to fix her, but simply wanted to be there with her. One evening, as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, glancing at the screen to find a message from David. "How about dinner tonight? I know a great little place you'd love." Ava smiled to herself, feeling the warmth of his words. She hadn't realized how much she had missed the simple things: a dinner out, an easy conversation, the feeling of being understood. "I'd like that," she replied. When they met at the restaurant, David was already seated at a small table by the window, a smile spreading across his face as she approached. "You look stunning," he said, his voice warm, genuine. Ava felt a flutter of something in her chest. It had been so long since someone had looked at her with such warmth, such admiration. "Thank you," she said softly as she took her seat across from him. The conversation flowed effortlessly, as it always did with David. They talked about everything: business, dreams, life. It was easy to be with him, easy to talk to him. And for the first time in a long while, Ava allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, this was something real. As the night wore on, their conversation shifted to more personal matters. David leaned in slightly, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that caught her off guard. "Ava," he said, his voice low but clear, "I want you to know that I'm not here to rush you. I understand the journey you've been through, and I'm not going anywhere. But I also want you to know that I care about you, more than I ever expected." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had felt it too, this growing connection, this undeniable pull. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that words couldn't quite explain. She took a deep breath, letting the moment settle around her. "I care about you too," she admitted. I'm still learning how to let someone in. It's not easy." David nodded, his expression softening. "I understand," he said. "And I'm not asking you to let go of your past or forget what you've been through. But I think you deserve to have someone who sees you, who values you for who you are, not just for what you've overcome." Ava looked into his eyes, the sincerity in his words resonating deeply with her. She had spent so much time hiding behind walls, protecting herself from pain, that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly let someone in. It wasn't about forgetting her past or pretending it didn't matter. It was about learning to trust again, to believe in the possibility of something good. As they finished their meal, Ava felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't just the food or the company. It was the realization that she was ready to take the next step. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that courtroom months ago, uncertain of her future. She was stronger now, more confident in who she was and what she wanted. And with David, she saw the potential for something beautiful. They left the restaurant together, walking side by side through the quiet streets. Ava glanced at David, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "For tonight. For understanding." David smiled back, his hand brushing hers as they walked. "Anytime, Ava, anytime." And in that moment, Ava knew that she had taken another step forward in her journey. It wasn't just about moving on from the past. It was about embracing the future with someone who respected her, loved her for who she was, and was ready to face whatever came next, together. As the weeks passed, Ava found herself settling into a rhythm she hadn't anticipated. Life was no longer a series of chaotic moments, but rather a calm, steady flow of progress. Her business ventures continued to grow, and she found herself more often in the company of people who appreciated her for her intellect, her resilience, and her vision. But it wasn't just her career that was flourishing. Her relationship with David had deepened in ways that felt natural, without pressure, and without the heavy expectations that had once haunted her past. David was patient, always there when she needed him, yet never overbearing. He respected her independence in a way that was refreshing, and in turn, Ava found herself opening up to him in ways she had never imagined. It was a slow, beautiful process, and with each passing day, she realized just how much he had come to mean to her. One evening, as they sat together at a quiet cafe, the conversation turned more personal. Ava felt a sudden warmth spread across her chest, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to fully experience in a long time. "Ava," David said, his voice gentle but steady, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us, about what this is." Ava looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were soft but sincere, and for a moment, she saw something in them that mirrored her own feelings. She hadn't said it out loud yet, but she knew deep down that she had found something special in David. She had been afraid to admit it, to let herself believe it. But now, with the calm of the moment wrapping around them, she knew the truth. "I think about us too," Ava replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard to imagine that I've allowed myself to get this close to someone again. But with you, it feels different. It feels right." David's smile softened, and he reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "You don't have to rush anything, Ava. I'm not going anywhere. I just want you to know that I'm here. With you, for you." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Ava had never heard before. She squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with emotion. She realized in that moment that she wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of being vulnerable, of letting someone in. With David, she could be herself, unapologetically and without reservation. Over the next few months, Ava and David grew even closer. Their connection deepened, and they began to spend more time together outside of their professional lives. They traveled, explored new places, and shared moments of joy that felt as if they had always been meant to happen. Ava found herself laughing freely again, without the burden of past pain clouding her every move. She wasn't looking to replace her past with David, but rather to build something new, a life that was uniquely hers, with someone who respected her autonomy, yet shared in her dreams. As spring blossomed around them, so did their relationship. Ava's business continued to thrive, and David's support was unwavering, even as his own career flourished. He never made her feel small or overshadowed her success. Instead, he celebrated it, lifting her up whenever she felt uncertain. It was a partnership in the truest sense, mutual respect, support, and love. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Ava returned home to find a surprise waiting for her. On the kitchen table, there was a small vase of fresh flowers, their vibrant colors brightening the room. Next to it was a note, handwritten in David's familiar script. "For the woman who has shown me what strength really looks like," it read. Ava felt a lump form in her throat as she read the words. She had never been one for grand gestures, but this simple act of kindness, meant everything. She had spent so much time building herself up, putting her own needs first, and now, in this moment, she realized how much she had come to rely on David, not just as a partner, but as someone who genuinely cared for her. As she placed the flowers in a vase and set them on the counter, Ava thought about how far she had come. She had started this journey alone, uncertain and afraid of what the future held. But now, with David by her side, she felt stronger than ever. She had rebuilt her life, piece by piece, and now it was time to embrace the future, whatever it may bring, with open arms. She wasn't defined by her past anymore. She was Ava Hayes, and she was ready for whatever came next. As Ava stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. It had been nearly a year since she had walked out of that courtroom, a woman who was broken but determined to rebuild her life. Now, as she gazed at the skyline, she realized just how much she had accomplished, not just in her business, but in her personal life as well. Her relationship with David had flourished into something beautiful, something she hadn't expected but had come to cherish deeply. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He had never tried to change her, never tried to fix her. He had simply stood by her, offering support when she needed it, space when she asked for it, and love when she was ready to receive it. Ava had learned to trust again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't in years, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Ava's business grew stronger. She had taken the foundation she had built with so much determination and turned it into an empire of her own. There were still challenges, of course. There always would be. But now, she faced them with a confidence she had never known before. She wasn't afraid to make decisions, to take risks, or to step into new opportunities. She had found a voice she hadn't known she had, and with that voice, she was ready to conquer whatever came her way. One evening, David picked her up after a long day of meetings. They drove out of the city, heading toward a quiet little house in the countryside that David had found for them. It wasn't extravagant, but it was peaceful. Ava loved the serenity of the place. The moment they stepped inside, she knew this was where she wanted to be. Not forever, but for now. It was a place to pause, to breathe, to just be. That night, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars, David turned to her, his hand gently resting on hers. "Ava," he said softly, "I want to spend my life with you. I want to build something beautiful together, not just in business, but in life." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined hearing those words, not after everything she had been through. She had told herself for so long that she didn't need anyone to complete her, that she was enough on her own. But in that moment, she realized that she didn't need to choose between love and independence. She could have both. She could build her own life, while also sharing it with someone who respected her, who understood her, and who was ready to support her every step of the way. David, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I never thought I could have both, my own life and someone by my side. But with you, I feel like I can. I want to build that with you too. David smiled, his eyes lighting up with warmth. They sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the peace of the moment. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was everything they needed. Ava knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of something truly special. As the night wore on, Ava felt a sense of contentment wash over her. The pain of her past, the betrayal, the heartbreak, was no longer a defining part of her. She had learned to let go, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for her to move forward. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. She had a future ahead of her, one that was full of promise, and for the first time, she was ready to embrace it fully. The next morning, as she woke up beside David, Ava smiled to herself. She had spent so many years focused on the past, on the hurt, on the things she had lost. But now, she had found something better. She had found herself, and in doing so, she had found a love that was worth everything. This was her life, her story, and no one could take that away from her.